I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do.
Hi, everybody. I want to say a quick congratulations to everybody that won Oscars on the Oscar night. We just had the Academy Awards a few days ago, and as it was mentioned before on my show, we had two horror films that were up for Best Picture. We had The Shape of Water and we had Get Out. And between those two, we ended up doing pretty good. It was a very historic night for horror. We have 5 Oscar wins between those two films. First, we have Jordan Peele, who won Best Original Screenplay for Get Out. Congratulations, Jordan. Believe it or not, that is the first time that an African American has won Best Original Screenplay. Hard to believe, but true. And then we have Guillermo del Toro. The Shape of Water won 4 Oscars, one of which being Best Picture, and Guillermo himself won Best Director. Congratulations, guys. It was really great. There are also some other great moments for horror inside of the Oscars. On the red carpet, Guillermo del Toro talked about Creature from the Black Lagoon, and we actually had a scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre represented inside of the 90th anniversary of the Oscars' greatest moments of film montage that they had. That's fantastic. They also said goodbye to a few people like George Romero. The bad side, they forgot to talk about Tobe Hooper. They did not say goodbye to Tobe Hooper. They did put Texas Chainsaw Massacre in that montage, but somehow they forgot about Tobe Hooper. That was a real shame, and as far as I'm concerned, kind of a snub. Now, everybody who's been listening to my show knows that I've been on a little campaign called Say Horror. I wanted to have one of those two guys say horror from the podium if they won. We didn't quite get that. We ended up getting, I think Guillermo ended up saying something like genre fantasy. Hey, you know, what can you do? Life goes on. And life goes on here at Hellbent for Horror as well. We're going to do a little bit of a change-up of how we normally do things. Most of the show is going to be the same. We're just going to add a few things. I went to a podcast meetup, and they did a little critique of the show. And I want to make sure that I'm still talking with you folks, not just talking at you. I want to make sure that you feel that this is a conversation that's happening. So some of the things that we're going to start doing, I'm opening up first to the listeners. If you have any kind of ideas on how the show could be better, let me know. If there's stuff that's working really well for you, let me know. Give me an email or send me an instant message about it. You can also tell me what's not working. I consider this kind of a community, and I'm hoping that you feel that it's a community. We're also going to end up having a mailbox. A lot of you folks have been getting in touch with me, giving me your own personal feelings about horror, telling me your first kiss, giving support, and I really want to be able to thank you guys and talk about you guys on the show. So I'll answer some email while we're doing this. And at the end of the show, we're also going to see about having a pick of the week. We're going to call it the week. We'll call it pick of the episode. And the reason that I'm doing that is because so many people ask me what I love to see that I've seen recently. What's the new movie that they should be watching that I saw? Now, by nature of the show that I do, most of the time I'm doing stories and themes. That means that not all the time it's going to be something that's new. A lot of times what I'm watching that I'm really jazzed by kind of goes by the wayside. So now we're going to do this. We're going to have a very important grading system, folks. You're going to love the grading system. It's going to be really, really important to the rest of your lives. And I think you'll really appreciate that I've taken the time to do all of this. But before we got too far off target, let's see about going into what we normally do, which is starting a conversation. I'm going to start the show talking about, let's see, what scares you? What really scares you? I hate that question. And I get that question all the time. The reason is, hey, I'm the horror guy, right? Everybody wants to know what scares me. And quite honestly, you know, it's an odd question because I'm scared of the things that everybody's scared of. I'm scared of dying. I'm scared of major illness. I'm scared of being deformed. I'm scared to dying alone. I'm scared of quicksand, falling into acid baths, some psychic making my head explode. You know, I'm just an average guy. I have all the same fears that you guys have as well. But of course, when people are asking that question, they're not asking that question of, well, what scares you in the way of what we have in common. When I'm talking about horror, I always like to try and find the common ground that we all have, this universality. But when they're asking that question, they're actually asking something specific. What they're really asking is something much more personal. They're asking something that is really what they're asking is about my phobias. They don't care about scares. They want to know that phobic thing, the thing that I recoil from. And, you know, they're assuming I have phobias, right? And they'd be right. I have phobias, and I have dealt with those, weirdly enough, by watching horror movies. Would it surprise you to find out that watching horror films helps some people deal with their phobias? Horror films have been found to help some people cope with the inner anxiety that they have, the uncontrollable fear. And we're not necessarily sure why, but what I want to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I want to talk about how there are common phobias that we have. I want to showcase some common phobias, and I want to talk about specific horror films that are basically tailor-made to work on those phobias. And there is a horror film for every phobia. And we're going to talk about those. And what I'll probably do as well is give my own testimony, talk a little bit about how I have certain phobias and how I've been able to get over some of them by way of horror. So let's start the conversation with what are phobias, right? Phobias are classified as anxiety disorders, and they can range from light to moderate to extreme, heavy in their intensity. And according to a 2017 report by the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 10%, 19.2 million Americans have varying level of phobias. Now, nobody knows exactly where they come from. Everybody knows what they feel like because 1 out of every 10 seems to have it. But they can say that they feel it may come from genetics, it may come from culture, and it may come from trauma. Now, if it was asked of me, I would say that trauma is probably the number one, because the way that I look at it is everything that really affects you, your triggers, they're like buttons that get installed in you. And when you're a kid, you have a lot of buttons that get installed because you're very impressionable. And I will say that for me personally, I may not even remember precisely how I got that phobia. I may not even remember the trauma, but because I was at a certain age, it kind of indelibly stuck inside of me. And that button got put in me, and the cables and everything run very, very deeply inside of me, as it does with everybody. Now, the good news about this is that there is anxiety treatment. There is treatment for phobias. There are different therapies. Let me tell you about my therapy. And I like to call this a spoonful of horror makes the phobia go down. If I'm having a bad day, nothing takes the edge off of a stressful day better than seeing someone decapitated by a crazed axe murderer. You know, if I'm feeling depressed, nothing shakes the blues away better than watching a movie where there's a hapless hunter who comes against mutant bears and they tear him into putty. Boy, that really helps. And I can tell you that the thought of someone trying to get their car started and it won't start while one of their undead relatives is hitting the windshield with a hammer, I mean, that just drops my anxiety level to a manageability that is rarely happening. So what I can say is that I do self-medicate through horror films, and I find that I can take the anxiety that I normally have and I transfer it into the horror film, and everything feels just a little bit better. And I'm not the only one who self-medicates with horror movies, quite honestly. There was research done on this in 2002, and he's still doing it now. Dr. Matthias Claesson from Aarhus University in Denmark studied the psychological effects of the horror film. So he talks about horror films as being this thing that someone can watch where you focus. You take this general free-floating anxiety that somebody has, and you can make it a focal point. You can focus in on whatever the horror is that is in the movie. It's a way to manage those negative emotions that we have. It creates a different tension than what you normally feel when you're feeling anxiety. It gives you a way to deal with the anxieties that somehow plague you, that you can't get rid of, you can't shake, and you get to put them on somebody else inside of that movie and do it in a safe way. If nothing else, you aren't watching the movie and thinking about your problems. You're outside of your head while you're watching a horror movie. Now, it may sound silly to think that that actually works, and yet, if you really talk to people, they'll tell you that if they have a bad day, they sometimes come home to watch an action film and see things blow up. Sometimes when people are sad, instead of watching a comedy, which is the logical choice that you would do, instead they watch something sad. They listen to a sad song. We tend to go towards those emotions. So I think that when we are feeling anxious, we are kind of like in a snowstorm, and we're kind of losing traction of the road. And when we lose that emotional traction, I think we instinctively steer into the slide. We go towards those emotions of which we are feeling. We drive ourselves towards that. We inoculate ourselves with a low-level strain of what ails us. And in a way, I kind of consider horror the hair of the dog that bit you. So it's like immersion therapy, right? You have psychologists that say that phobias can be treated with aversion therapy. And they also talk about phobias that a lot of them aren't what we think they are. In other words, our first thought is that we're just absolutely terrified by the encounter that we're having. What psychologists tend to say about this is that we are not facing that fear. When we are running from the phobia, we are actually averting ourselves from the emotion. And basically, we're not taking in some very important experience that would allow us to be able to deal with this. There are medical studies that say depression and anxiety may not be all about serotonin anymore. There have been studies that say that there's inflammation on the brain that happens, very light inflammation, and that causes some of the depression. Now, with that said, it is also noted that white blood cells allow for the swelling to go down. They lessen the swelling. They drop the inflammation. And one of the best ways to get those white blood cells just percolating is to be scared, to be stressed. Now, obviously, too much stress, really bad for you. But just a little bit, that inoculation can be useful. Some people get on roller coasters. Some people go to loud rock concerts. Some people go to horror movies. Roller coaster, horror film, you are releasing some healthy stuff that's going into your body. So, hey, what can I say? It seems like perhaps horror is actually healthy for you. Now, whatever phobia you have, though, I guarantee you that there is a horror movie out there that can give you the immersion therapy that I'm talking about. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to list some common phobias, and I'm going to list movies that masterfully exploit those fears. Now, before I get too far into that, a caveat, know thyself, okay? I'm not saying that watching horror films is going to be a healing process you're going to be cured, all right? I'm not saying that horror movies are an alternative to medical attention. If you need medical attention, get medical attention. I am not telling you to cancel your doctor's appointment and binge watch Friday the 13th, the entire franchise. However, I will say, it couldn't hurt to do them both. You know, I speak from experience when I say that watching a movie that tweaks your phobias can be weirdly calming, but it can also be kind of unsettling. Remember, the remote is your friend. What we want to do is nothing more than give you some well-needed experience with something that you normally avoid, that you can't come to terms with. Watching the movie gives you those moments that you can't give to yourself. It's all about dosage. Remember, we are not here to poison you. We are here to give you inoculation. Dosage, inoculation, folks. So let's start with a big one. Arachnophobia, most likely the most common phobia that there is, the fear of spiders. It affects 1 in 3 women and it affects 1 in 4 men. And it's probably the phobia that Hollywood noticed the most because you have probably more horror films that at least have creepy spider moments in them than anything else. And there are also many horror films that are dedicated, kind of devoted to talking about the fear of spiders. Now, with that, it can be a little bit creepy for some people to deal with that kind of arachnophobia in a film. So what I'll say is I'm going to talk about a couple different stages on this one. So if you need to get in on like the shallow end of the pool, I highly recommend the 1950s version of Tarantula with the exclamation point. Yes, it's the giant atomic spider movie where we used to be so afraid of atomic energy that we thought we were going to get giant insects that would go crazy on everybody. It's kind of a corny film. It's in black and white, so already you're not going to have that feeling that it's absolutely real. But it still gets a twinge because the tarantula is real. They put it on sets, miniatures, and they blew air on it, and you can tell that really weird crawl that it is a real tarantula. It can still give you a little bit of a rise, and some of the models that they use are a little bit creepy. So it does work, it is fun, and it's an easy way to jump in. The next level, I would say, would be to going to the movie Arachnophobia. Hey, it's named after the thing. It's got to be kind of creepy. Well, it's not the creepiest one, I can tell you that. But I can say that it is one of the biggest budgeted ones. It's the one that's maybe crazier than a lot because it does become an action film. It is full of computer-generated spiders, but there are also real spiders. So the story is there's a new species of Amazonian killer spider that travels to California, mates with a normal natural house spider, and chaos ensues. I guess it's really a party animal because we get an awful lot of spiders awful quick. They're all poisonous, they're all nasty, and they're coming after everybody that's in this California town. Like I said, most of them are computer generated. They move a little bit weird, they move a little bit fast, so they're not that scary, but there are a lot of really good close-ups of real spiders. There is some human contact with real spiders. And the spiders that they've got in this movie are really ugly, and they put them in big close-up. Here's something to remember, though. Those spiders aren't poisonous. The ones that they use, they got for their ugliness, not because of their danger. They're actually New Zealand crab spiders, and they're harmless to people, but they look butt-fuck ugly. So they work very well. However, they're not poisonous, so, you can look at it and go, they're just actors too. They're just acting that they're poisonous and horrible spiders. And by the end of the movie, you might actually find that you've had a lot of fun watching it. The movie that I will say gets me the creepy crawliest over spiders is a very low budget one that you may not think is a very good movie, but it is a great arachnophobia movie. It is Kingdom of the Spiders, starring William Shatner. Yeah, it is ultra low budget, but I have to say it is a movie that really has some impact to it. Now, William Shatner, as I mentioned, stars in it. He's a veterinarian who realizes just a little too late that his small Arizona town is on a new migration path for a horde of deadly tarantulas. And these deadly tarantulas, this movie came out during the ecological horror story sequences in films where we had movies where the ecology was coming back, nature versus man. And so pesticides turn these tarantulas into killers, and they're just attacking anything that they can. Now, why is this scary? Well, director John Bud Cardos, a legend of B-movie making, he knew he didn't have a lot of money, so he spent his money wisely. This is a movie that has 5,000 live tarantulas in it, crawling over everything, including the actors. And since it was so low budget, you know that they're putting real spiders on all of the actors. This movie was so low budget that there's a legendary stunt that's in this movie where a car goes smashing into a house and all these characters jump out of the way of the car just in time as it hits the house. None of those were stuntmen. None of those were stand-ins. That was William Shatner and the cast because they didn't have any money for stuntmen and for stand-ins at that moment, so they just improvised. So chances are they didn't have a lot of fake spiders to put on these people. So when you are seeing scenes where people are completely covered and freaking out on spiders, and they're looking at the walls, and the walls are covered with spiders, some of them are painted, but when it is just crawling with them, you know that they're absolutely real. So when you see this little girl on a bed, screaming her lungs out, the floor is covered with tarantulas, there's about 20 or 30 of them on the bed advancing towards her, this is not method acting. So I will tell you that this movie has some serious power to it, and it is very creepy because they're tarantulas. I will also say, if you are a spider lover, you may want to pass on this one. John Cardos probably didn't put some fake ones when they were running them over with cars. So there's probably some stuff in there that you really don't want to see if you love spiders. What I will say is this movie will probably give you the creepy crawlies enough that you'll probably want to check the pillows around your bed and on your couch when you're done with it. Now let's move on to the next of our very popular and common phobias. Let's go with claustrophobia, the fear of enclosed spaces. Now, when we think about claustrophobia, initially we think, small spaces and the walls are closing in. You're stuck, you're trapped. Well, the reality is, yes, claustrophobia happens when you feel trapped and stuck, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the space needs to be small. It means you need to feel as if the walls are closing in on you. And sometimes that comes from not having any exits, no way out. You don't know where you can get away. And all of a sudden, a regular sized room can shrink down. You can be in a mall and suffer from claustrophobia, and you go to the front doors, and the front doors are locked, and you try one, you try the next, and that's locked, and all of a sudden, the walls are going to start closing in. Now, I say that because I wanted to do a little bit of diversity on claustrophobia. There are some movies, if you want one that's just pure claustrophobia, I didn't find it terribly entertaining, but Ryan Reynolds in a movie called Buried, he's literally buried in a coffin for 90 minutes. Have fun with that. But I want to go in a couple different directions on this. So the first movie that I want to talk about is one that takes the concept of claustrophobia to how you can't escape, how you feel trapped. And that's going to be the original Alien, directed by Ridley Scott. Now, for a lot of people, that may not be the first choice for a movie about claustrophobia. But the reality is, if you take a look at the poster, it says right on it, in space, nobody can hear you scream. Is there anything more frightening, more trapped, more claustrophobic than that? Now, we're talking about a movie that takes place in the vastness of the universe, the vastness of space. There are moments in this movie where people are in hypersleep because it takes so long to travel as far as they are. But you can't go outside. Water everywhere, not a drop to drink. You have that in space. You can go anywhere as long as you're only in this ship. And that ship looks small compared to the vastness, the indifference of the universe. And they are stuck on this ship for years. And then a monster is on board. Think how fast that ship shrinks. And the movie even plays into some claustrophobic fears. If you are, say, inside of a place and you feel a little bit trapped and you know that maybe outside is dangerous, do you start worrying about the integrity of it? Well, they talk about the integrity of the ship. There is a sequence in the movie where there is acid, an acid substance that drips onto the floor on one deck and starts going through all the decks. And the fear is it's going to go through the hull, they're going to have a hull breach. So you're obviously going to feel the vulnerability about that. And as this monster is hiding inside of the ship is getting smaller. There are places they can no longer go. There's places that they fear that it might hide. They're in air ducts. At certain points, they're hiding in air ducts. And then they're in rescue ships, which are smaller versions of the small ship that they're on. And it might be in there with them. You can feel that tension. And one of the things that Ridley Scott does very well is he shows you the bleakness of the atmosphere inside of the ship. It feels stale. And when people are walking wearing space suits, all you can hear is that breath, that very labored breath of air being forced into you. It's hyperventilation, and it feels very real. Now, the next movie I want to talk about that does this as well. It's another movie that you may not think of as a claustrophobic film, but it's Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary's Baby is about a pregnant woman who moves into an Upper East Side apartment, and her life changes as her elderly neighbors take care of her natal care. And you've probably heard about this movie quite a bit. But just in case you haven't, I'm going to try and stay away from spoilers as much as possible. These people pretty much take care of her entire pregnancy. And this movie plays on you feeling what Rosemary Woodhouse is feeling. It's a masterful job of making you feel the paranoia and the claustrophobia that many pregnant women feel. You have something growing inside of you. It is changing your emotions. You are, especially at the time that this movie was made in the late 60s, you are sequestered into your house. You are basically a prisoner there. Your life is no longer the same. And in this film, we have a minor complication that happens with the baby. So at that point, these elderly people basically ban people from coming to visit her in her apartment. Her old life is pretty much kept away from her. And, you know, you probably heard about the twist that happens. Why I say that this is a great claustrophobic film is that none of what ends up being what this movie is known for is truly revealed until the last reel of the film. The rest of the movie is question marks. It is your paranoia starting to get to you. It is half-seeing conversations. It is people standing in doorways, making you feel like the room is smaller. Rosemary can't get through because people are just politely, subtly moving her around the room by positioning themselves. She can hear conversations, but she can't see the people. She's finding doorways that are behind big furniture that she's not supposed to see. So the building is slowly getting smaller on her. Not only is the place starting to come in on her and the wall starting to close in, but she has something growing inside her. So her inside, something is getting bigger. She is really getting cramped in this movie. And that, I think, is one of the reasons that movie, by the end, you are really, really nervous. The movie is masterfully shot to be able to make you feel that the walls are not just figuratively closing in. But if we're going to talk about what everybody thinks is pure claustrophobia, I've got the movie for you. It is The Descent. It's a Scottish film. It is fantastic. If you're looking for pure, primal claustrophobia that while you're watching it, you got to stretch your toes inside of your shoes just to make sure there's still room in there. If you want that kind of feeling, look no further. This movie is it. The movie is about Sarah, a woman who has just lost her child and her husband in a freak car accident. She was out with her outdoors adventurer friends. She has 5 women, and every year they get together and they go on adventures, whitewater rafting, things like that. And on the way home after one of these, there's a car accident. She is the only survivor in the car. Her husband and child have died. She is basically a ghost for a year. And then her friends invite her to the next outdoor get-together. So they're going to get together. They're going to have a reunion. Everybody's a little bit nervous about this because they know that she is rather fragile. So what do? They decide to go spelunking in underground caves. Nothing speaks to somebody who's fragile more than, hey, let's go into the bowels of the earth. So not only do they go spelunking in underground caves for some character building and some bonding, the leader decides to add a little bit of challenge to this. The place that they initially were going to go is too much of a tourist trap. They really want to be left alone so they can get this bonding. They decide to use an unmapped cave system that's been discovered, and they decide to go in there. And they also forget to report to the authorities that they're going down into this unmapped thing. So they're definitely going to have a lot of solace down there. There's not going to be a lot of people around. Now, with that said, what could possibly go wrong, right? I ask you. I have no idea. Let's just watch and find out. Well, what ends up happening is the women commit themselves to one of the many tunnels that are in this place. And as they're going into these tunnels, the tunnels are getting closer and closer, tighter and tighter. The air that they're breathing is centuries old, and it is very quiet. And it starts to get even tighter. And about that time, there is a tunnel collapse behind them, between them and the entrance of which they came. Now, they have no choice but to go down this unmapped tunnel. No idea where it's going to go, except that it is going down. They are descending into the earth. They're going 2 miles into the earth. The only thing that they have as light, there is no light down there, is what's on their helmets, Their lights on their helmets are starting to dim. The only sound is their belabored breathing and some water drips. The breathing in the caves, the air is stale. There's dust. They're rising the dust up every time that they move. And the tunnel gets tighter and tighter. And it's about the time that they're on their stomachs. And the walls of the tunnel are abutting against their shoulders, that they realize that they are not alone. Ta-da! And that movie is astonishingly well made and astonishingly effective, especially for claustrophobics. I will say that I'm not terribly claustrophobic, but when I saw a certain sequence where somebody does actually get kind of trapped with her shoulders stuck up against these walls, I started to sweat. It is really well acted, it is very economically shot, and it's well worth your time. And the descent itself isn't just a descent into ground. We get the feeling that this is also a descent into madness. I will say that even if you don't have the phobia, watch the descent. It's well worth watching. So let's go from having claustrophobia to agoraphobia. Let's go to the fear of open spaces. Now, just like claustrophobia, it's not exactly as it sounds. Yes, of course, you're afraid of open spaces, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not just a lot of stuff all around you. And agoraphobia, a lot of times people basically think that it's not only the open space, it's more about people, that they're afraid of getting in touch with people. That is something that is part of it. Where that comes in is that agoraphobia itself, this fear, is key around feeling threatened and feeling that there's no way to escape feeling threatened. So it can be people, and it can be open spaces, and it can be repetitive spaces where you can't figure out where the exit is. You know, you're completely alone, you have no answers, there's no help. That's the essentials that you normally hear with agoraphobia. One of the things that when I asked somebody about it, they said, yeah, it's the idea that you can look forever and there's no walls and there's no doors and there's no exits, and you start feeling this thing of like, how do I get out of here? But say you find a door and on the other side there's still nothing, that's agoraphobia. When there's no answers, you feel like finally I'm out of here, and then nothing. Completely alone, no answers. And that brings me to the first movie that I want to talk about for agoraphobia, which is 28 Days Later. Now, what I will say is the first 20 minutes of 28 Days Later is probably one of the best agoraphobic moments that you can have. It's full of the terror of being alone. Literally, in this movie, the main character wakes up in a coma in an abandoned hospital, naked, hooked up to IVs. He's calling hello, and there is no answer. In fact, the first 10 minutes of the movie, he is saying hello, and there is no answer, and it's just his voice echoing. He is walking through the halls. There is nobody there. He comes up to phones and phone booths. They're dangling loose. He picks them up. There's nobody on the other end. There's not even a dial tone. Death, nothing. Nobody to tell him anything. He is walking in a major city. This movie takes place in and outside of London. He walks out of the hospital into downtown London, and there is nobody. It is abandoned. There are cars just sitting on sidewalks. There is money blowing like leaves on the street. The bridges are empty. There are photographs scattering the ground everywhere. He is malnourished. He's dehydrated. He's weak. He has atrophy from being in a coma, so his legs aren't working that well. And nobody can tell him what's going on. That is pretty amazing. And I'm not even going to tell you what the movie's about. That's your start. Have fun with that. Now, with that, he finally does run into somebody. And when he does run into somebody, it is not good. It does not go well. This is a very, very strong movie, and especially for people who are agoraphobic. I will say that 28 Days Later is one of the better movies about the terror of being alone. But you know what? Sometimes you don't have to be alone to feel completely alone. You can be with someone else and still feel that agoraphobia because there's no way out. There's no exit. You are lost. And with that, I want to go to the next film, Open Water. What could feel more helpless to somebody than being lost out at sea? Think about it. This is where the idea of the horizon comes into play. An indefinite distance between a line of the sky and the water. That's how far you've got to go to get safe. The underwater, what's beneath you, dark, unknown, deep. You can't move very well in this. This is not your natural area of expertise. Swimming, you can swim, but you are not made for this. But what is made for this is everything that's living under the water, that's coming up on you and you can't see it. I mean, what could be worse, right? Now, imagine there's no boat. That's this movie, Open Water. It's based on a true incident. Tom and Eileen Lonergan were mistakenly left behind by their tour boat, and they were out scuba diving. Their bodies were never found, although their wetsuits were. They washed up on the shore. It became a big story for a little bit, and this movie deals with that. It's not their story, but it is based on that story. And the way that the movie is done works perfectly for bringing up this fear, because it's shot on digital video, so it already doesn't look like your normal film. It's kind of documentary in style, and so that gives it a certain level of reality. You're already a little bit off. It is a very low-budget film. It's shot on location out in the ocean. It's out on open water, and there's also where the actors are in the ocean with the director, with the sharks. Yes, this is shot with live sharks. That's right. 2 actors, the director, out in the water, no shark tank, while the shark wrangler is on the other side of the boat throwing chum into the water so that the sharks will come. So let's just say this. When a shark dorsal fin pops up in front of the actors and both of them scream very high-pitched screams, it feels very, very real. And nobody was hurt in this movie, but you can really feel the tension. It is like real, because it feels as if everybody's improvising what's happening, and they may very well have been. I mean, they're out there freezing in wetsuits. I'm not necessarily sure how much of a heavy-duty script that there was, but all of that works for the movie as opposed to against the movie. Now, with that, by nature of this kind of production, there is no big Jaws moments. You're not going to have this cinematic moment where, you know, they're out there and you see this huge fin and, you know, or the shark jumps over them or any kind of weird thing. That's not going to happen. This is very, very small. What you get is the emotions of these people. That's what's driving this film. It's the idea of not knowing. It's not knowing if there's a boat coming. It's not knowing where the land is. It's not knowing how long they can float. It's not knowing how dehydrated they're becoming. All of that is what really creeps you out. This is weirdly existential horror. This is a movie that is really scary, and it's almost absurd. The idea of this happening to somebody, it's like if it happened to you, you'd be like, is this really happening? It feels absurd. You have 2 people that are reassuring each other over and over again that a boat is coming soon, and they're just bobbing in the water waiting. And that's why I call it, to my friends, bleeding for Godot. Now, there is a phobia for sharks. Now, I put this movie in Agoraphobia because I think it is different than most shark movies. Now, Galeophobia is the shark fear, and Jaws kind of falls into that, because I think those movies like Jaws, they're more about the shark than they are the ocean. I think this movie is much more about the idea of being lost at sea. Now, Jaws does fit Galeophobia, but I think better versions of that are less good films, like Deep Blue Sea. Deep Blue Sea has amazing shark attacks. It's all about the shark. It's all CG, though, but it's perfectly good for Galeophobia. One of the movies that I didn't watch initially when it came out, and then somebody urged me to watch, is actually really good for Galeophobia, and that's 47 Meters Down. I stayed away from the movie, and then I finally saw it, and I was like, wow, this is better than I thought. And one of the reasons that it's better than I thought is the end. Watch it for the end. It has a fantastic ending. I actually clapped when I saw that they actually had the nuts to go to where that movie went. Now, if we're talking about agoraphobia, though, let's talk about one more movie, one that's really, really strong in this. So if you want to know what it's like to have agoraphobia, go to someone who's dealt with it. And that's what the next movie, Citadel, has going for it. It's an Irish film. Writer-director Kieran Foy took his own experiences with agoraphobia and he used them to make his horror movie, Citadel. He developed agoraphobia when he was attacked as a teenager by a group of kids wearing hoods that beat him with a hammer and then took a syringe and a dirty syringe and stuck it into his neck. He ended up having a really hard time with being around people and in open spaces through his 20s. And then he made this movie as part of how he got over it. He actually was over it before he made the film. But he uses some of those experiences that he had to accentuate the horror that's inside of this film. One of the things that he said about the agoraphobia and the attack was, yes, the beating certainly gave him agoraphobia, but what really got him was that he had no clue why they did what they did. In other words, they didn't take his wallet, they didn't ask him anything, they didn't force him to do anything, they just beat him for the sake of beating him. And that horror of that kind of feeling is what fuels the movie Citadel. So the movie starts a very similar act happening to one of the main characters. In the beginning of the movie, a husband and his pregnant wife are leaving a condemned building. They're moving into a different place. This place is falling apart. They're in a very bad neighborhood in this tenement. And when they're leaving, the wife is attacked by hooded figures who beat her with a hammer, and they take a syringe full of something, we don't know what it is, and they inject it into the belly, into her belly, right by the pregnant child. So the child is born early and survives. The mother goes into a coma and eventually dies. And the husband, Tommy, he ends up with agoraphobia. And we get to see through the eyes of someone who's had agoraphobia what it's like to walk the streets and just exist when you have agoraphobia. We see him going through therapy. We see him, how hard it is for him to just go across the street. He lives in an area that's at the end of a bus stop, the bus line, that is. And so the buses go no further than where he is, and they don't want to go that far because where he lives is a pretty bad part of town. And we see him with a stroller with his child trying to make it back to his house. And that is really, really disturbing. As the movie goes on, Tommy starts to see hooded figures, hooded teenagers, and they're circling the house. And they come to the door. And then they break in and they steal his daughter. And we're not sure if we're actually seeing that or not. We don't know if that is real or if that is his psychology, if he is seeing things, if he is hallucinating because of the fear that it is becoming too big for him. It's a great movie for that kind of energy. You will feel what it's like to be helpless and to be weak and to feel so scared that you are a constant victim. And that's Citadel. I think it's a great movie for agoraphobes if you want to do immersion therapy. Now I want to talk about the next phobia. That's mysophobia, the fear of germs. Now you might be the kind of person who knows that the average person touches their face an average of 2,000 to 3,000 times a day. And you might also be the same kind of person who notices the guy in the bathroom that doesn't wash his hands before he leaves. And you may think about that guy the next time you're going to shake hands with somebody. If you are that way, boy, I've got some great movies for you. Mysophobia is the excessive fear of germs. Now, this is one phobia that's a little bit different than the others because it has a very unpleasant side effect. This phobia is growing. And as that phobia grows, there is an overuse of antibacterial products and antibiotics that has really created a super resistant group of super germs. And that has made this phobia a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, keep that in mind while we're watching this next film. My next film that I want to talk about is Eli Roth's Cabin Fever. It's a mysophobic nightmare if there ever was one. Basically, the story is 5 college friends are in a cabin in the woods for a week. Unbeknownst to them, flesh-eating virus attacks animals and has just jumped to its first human. right in that area. Just what you need, right? So, this movie has a laundry list of germophobic anxieties. First, contaminated water supplies. Just what you need. You can't even drink the water. Diseased animals. Great, now you got to worry about what kind of animal gets near you. Inappropriately sprayed bodily fluids. Yes, that happens. Every kind of bodily fluid squirts all over the place in this movie. Unprotected sex. Just what you need as well. All this stuff is just a germaphobe's worst nightmare. But the movie actually has probably the greatest worst nightmare in it. It is probably the secret fear of any germaphobe, which is a bathtub sequence where someone is scrubbing in the tub. And it comes to a realization that no matter how much you scrub, you can never clean deep enough. I'll leave it at that. The next movie I want to talk about is Contagion. And this movie makes cabin fever seem tame because this movie goes for authenticity. Ta-da, that's the kind of thing that'll get you crazy. Now, it's so authentic and so terrifying that it turns pretty much everybody who sees it into a germaphobe for at least one day after they see it. They start reading all sorts of stuff. Weirdly enough, this movie has a calming effect on people who have mysophobia because it shows everyone trying to deal with what they feel every day. People trying to cope with that panic. That realization, having it right in there, is somehow calming. Now, the movie itself is about a pandemic that's taking over the world, much like what happened in 1918 with the influenza pandemic. Killed 500 million people. To put that into perspective, that was 25% of the world population at the time. So this film, the filmmakers decided to consult an epidemiologist and decided to, say, hey, can you create a realistic supervirus that could jump species? And the guy did. And with that, they then went to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and WHO, the World Health Organization, and said, hey, we just made up this realistic supervirus that can jump species. I'd like to consult you now and ask how you would combat this supervirus and how prepared are we for it? So let me just say that the chaos, the dread, the desolation and destruction and panic that is in the movie Contagion is their honest and unflinching answer to that question. The movie itself has no opening credits, so it tries its best not to feel like a movie. It has a little bit of a documentary feel to it. There's no stirring music, there's no incidental music, things just happen. And anyone can die at any time. This movie has some big budget actors, some Oscar winners. But let me tell you that some of those Oscar winners may not make it to the half-hour point of this film. Now, let's move on to the next phobia. Let's go to trypanophobia, the fear of needles. I think lots of people have this, at least on a very, very low level. Of course, there is the very extreme. And the reason that I say most people have this is because there's just something unsettling at a primal level about someone sticking a sharp, hollow object into your flesh and then below your flesh and going into a major portion of your body that's needed to keep the body alive and circulating. And it's going to dig in there. And its sole purpose is to either inject something foreign into you, into that spot, or to suck something very valuable out of that spot. And I think that just hits us on a level that is extremely uncomfortable. And we're voluntarily allowing somebody to do that. But when they're doing that, we start having second thoughts. And I think maybe that's why when we talk about needles, if we're, say, looking at drug abuse, probably the one out of all the drug abuses that exist, the one that creeps people out the most is intravenous drug use, injecting heroin into your veins. And that's where this next movie comes in, Requiem for a Dream. It's a surreal nightmare that just goes right into the fear of needles. Now, the movie itself is about 4 people who basically retreat from real life, the real world, through drugs. And some of them use prescription drugs and overuse them. Some of them use methamphetamines, and others intravenously shoot heroin. And that is probably the focal point of the movie, the strongest point of the movie, the most disturbing part of the movie, especially for anybody who has a fear of needles, is the intravenous drug use. Now, with that, everybody that's in the movie starts with a drug habit that's just a habit. And then it kind of becomes maybe silly. And then it becomes difficult. And then it becomes a nightmare. It becomes uncontrollable in slavery. Drug addiction in this movie is depicted like a demonic possession. You know, it is something that is taking over the person, and its sole purpose is to destroy the shell in which it inhabits. And this movie goes into some serious detail about that, to say the least. We have many very surreal shots of people injecting into areas that they shouldn't be injecting anymore. Areas of the body that are starting to suppurate. There is obvious infection, but that's the place they need to put it. And so we watch in extreme close-up this needle going into open wounds. Let's just say you can smell the necrosis on this film. Now, with that said, Requiem for a Dream is not the most disturbing movie about needles. The reason that this next movie is on this list is because it is probably the ultimate needle movie, even though the needles don't come in until maybe the last 20 minutes. The movie is Audition. Now, Audition's about a guy who fakes being a movie producer so he can audition beautiful women so that he can take them to bed. And so basically the beginning of the movie is as twisted as Breakfast at Tiffany's or any other romantic comedy. And it feels like a romantic comedy for a while until he meets the woman he should have never met. He meets someone who is vengeful, damaged, psychotic, knows what he's doing from the very beginning. And this isn't her first rodeo with guys like him. In fact, there have been people disappearing all around Tokyo because they've dated her. So, what she does when this fake producer decides to break off the relationship is exactly why this movie is being talked about right now. So, the difference between this and Requiem for a Dream. So, Requiem for a Dream has some really disturbing stuff with hypodermic needles in it, but the people are voluntarily doing this to themselves. In Audition, this adds that extra fear that you have when you go to the doctor and you have someone forcefully doing it to you. When you're supposed to trust that person and you suddenly have this great fear, what if they make a mistake? Well, this movie has somebody who is intentionally, without consent, using needles on somebody. And that's why I think that this is a trypanophobe's worst nightmare. So, what we have in this movie is a cornucopia of needle horrors. Anything that you can think about that's unsettling about needles is in this movie. First, you have hypodermic needles. She drugs a guy by what he drinks. She puts something in his drink, he passes out. When he wakes up, he's on a rubber mat. And he has the pleasure of seeing this woman standing there with a tray full of hypodermic needles. And she grabs his tongue and sticks a needle deep into his tongue so that he can't scream. It paralyzes his tongue. And then she lets him know lovingly that she is injecting into different areas of his body a paralytic. It is basically going to get him to where he is paralyzed, but it does nothing to the nerve endings. He will feel everything. And then, it's not just hypodermic needles. She then pulls out possibly the world's biggest box of acupuncture needles. And I don't know how they shot this movie. I don't know what special effects were done. But let's just say, by the end of this movie, yeah, you've had just about everything that you could possibly think of happen with needles happen. And I give that movie high marks. And it is certainly someone who fears needles, their worst dream. So, That's a lot of phobias we just talked about. And as I mentioned, it may sound a little bit extreme, some of these movies, but it's immersion therapy. You know, what my thought is yeah, it might disturb you a little bit to watch these movies, but just think about how freeing it could feel to make it through the worst possible scenarios that your phobia could throw at your cerebral cortex, and you get out of it on the other side without a scratch after an hour and a half. It's got to feel pretty good. At least it felt pretty good to me when I was able to conquer one of my phobias. Now, it's assuredly not a cure, but perhaps it's a small step towards progress, you know? Now, with that, I will also say that whether you can sit through a movie about your phobias that exploits your phobias will probably be dependent upon how extreme your phobia is. Because like I said before, these phobias are deep. And these phobias were installed in you back when you were a kid. You know, these are phobias where the button that gets pressed, the circuitry that runs those buttons goes way, way deep inside of you. And to talk about that a little bit, let me talk about my phobias. I'll talk about my brush with arachnophobia. Yes, I had a hell of a brush with arachnophobia for a good portion of my life. I can tell you exactly when I got it. I was 12 years old. I was helping out a friend who was a tree surgeon. He had to have a rope, a support rope, go around a big oak tree that he was working on that had ivy covering it, and it was abutted up against a brick wall that also had ivy on it. And he said, hey, you're a skinny little kid. Can you take this rope and go between the wall and the tree so that I can wrap it around? I'm like, yeah, sure, no problem. So I'm sliding through. I get to the other side, and all of a sudden I realize that my arms are itching. And I look down, and my feet, my legs, my crotch, my chest, my arms, my neck are covered with squirming daddy long leg spiders. And I collapse right there. I don't know how they got them off of me. I don't remember much of anything after that. But after that, I was scared to death of each and every spider that I saw. And, you know, I tell people this story sometimes. They're like, daddy long legs? It's like, they're barely spiders. What are you talking, daddy long legs? And it's like, yes, I know. They're cute, right? Let me help you out on this, partner. How about I get a bucket of isopods? They're kind of cute. Not going to hurt you. They can't bite you. And let's stick your head in it. You tell me how cute they are at that moment. There's something about being immersed. Anyway, I will not defend my phobia anymore. We'll just get off that. But what ended up happening was I had this fear for quite a bit of time, and then I went to see the movie Arachnophobia that I talked about before. And my friends thought I was nuts. Like, boy, you just like punishment, and you're going to go and see this movie. And I will say that the first 15, 20 minutes of it was really, really rough because the spiders were really scary and it was building up. But it becomes such an overexposed kind of craziness of spiders. There are so many spiders. It is a universe of incredibly smart and athletic spiders, stunt spiders that can outrun people, that it became absurd. And I saw so many spiders that by the end of it, I actually had a little bit of immersion therapy that worked. I was looking at that really creepy, ugly spider in close-up that's actually a New Zealand crab spider, and it didn't bother me anymore by the end of the film. I won't say that that cured me, but it was a first step in me getting over a fear of spiders, and I'll tell you now, I have a pretty normal and natural fear of spiders. It's kind of what everybody has, I would say, maybe a little bit higher. Let's just say, spiders and me, we coexist rather well right now. I can watch that spider that's on YouTube and giggle, you know. So anyway, I'm talking about a phobia that I did kick, but I said some of them are really hard. And so I'm going to talk about one that I haven't been able to completely kick. I will say that I got 9/10 of it. Most of it is gone, but there is a piece of this phobia that is so deeply embedded somewhere inside of my psyche, right outside of the touch of logic, that I can't get rid of it. The phobia I haven't completely gotten rid of is demonophobia, the fear of demons. Now, this is a button that was installed in me by my fundamentalist childhood, and I know it sounds absolutely crazy, right? Silly. I'm afraid of demons, and yet I have to say, I've gotten rid of 9/10 of this fear, but there's still this one piece deep down, somewhere in my DNA, hidden by this fundamentalist group that I can't put the finger of logic on. And occasionally, I will still have something happen, usually late at night, a moment of terror, that I suddenly feel that demons are real and I'm being watched. Now, demonophobia is rooted in religious beliefs, and it usually manifests itself during a crisis of faith. And I would say that my entire childhood kind of qualifies as a crisis of faith. The religion that I was in utterly, truly believed that demons walked the earth. Not only did they walk the earth, they were indestructible, they never slept, and they were invisible. They were all around you. They could be in the same room with you. They're watching you, and they're waiting for you to fuck up in some way. And then they're going to mess with you. They either want to terrify you or they want to possess you. Now, there is one time when they will manifest themselves, and that's to scare you. So these things can be invisible, but they can also take the form of a human being just to mess with you, just to terrify you. And this was considered truth to me, because it was in the Bible and it was literal, and they took the Bible very, very literal. So let's just say my overactive imagination kept me awake many, many nights. Now, my mom believed all of this, and she felt that there were demons basically rapping at the windows. Now, my mom was emotionally unwell at the time. She was not dealing very well with the divorce that was happening between herself and my father. And so she thought, yeah, horror is happening in this house. Demons are all over the place. And it didn't help that we had family friends who were also in this religion that told us horror stories about this stuff. One guy's telling us that he woke up one morning and there was a demon at the foot of his bed just sitting there, and it turned to him, and it looked like a guy, but it didn't have any eyes. And another guy is telling us about how he was walking through a playground, and there was a little girl on a swing set, and she jumps off the swing, starts running right at him as fast as possible, too fast for a kid, growling, and he says a quick prayer, and pop, like a soap bubble, she's gone. You know, these were all the things that I would hear. I had these demons after me, but you know what? I didn't have to worry about it because I had this. I said a prayer and it was gone. They said it like it was nothing. To me, it was a freaking nightmare, and it kept me up at night. I would have hallucinations that the shadows on the walls were peeling off the walls and walking towards me. What I can say is that I believe that religious zealots live in a horror movie of their own making. Now, what was my immersion therapy? What helped me through? Well, the first one's probably pretty obvious to you. The Exorcist. The Exorcist is probably the shock treatment for my entire generation. What I'll say is that there was a lot of significant things about The Exorcist, but probably the most significant thing that I can say about the movie in this situation is that it had an impact where it got everyone off the spiritual fence. It filled pews in churches as fast as it filled psychiatrist couches. People really started to take a hard look at their loss of faith, or their lack of faith, or their lack of belief in the system. Whatever it was, it really hit on hit a chord for people. And for those that were religious, this movie and its look at fight of good and evil with demons was very, very strong. And it took me about 3 viewings of The Exorcist before I got comfortable with the film. You know, it was rough going for me. But what it also did, and why The Exorcist is so important to me, is that it was such a strong film, and it was such a impactful film, that it created a template overnight for an entire genre of films that were going to come out about demonic possession. And to this day, even the most imaginative of these demonic possession films fall into a pattern that is created by just how good and strong The Exorcist was. No matter what, the first half of the movie is what's scary. And then about halfway through, maybe a little bit more, the possession happens. The person gets possessed. And then, after that, we have the story pretty much shrinks. We have a battle of good and evil. Once people know that it is a possession, they get the right professionals in. The battle for good for evil is started, and the movie shrinks to the size of a bedroom or a basement or a farmhouse where the person who is afflicted is tied to a chair or tied to a bed. They're tied. The movie's not going nowhere. It is stuck right in that spot, waiting for good and evil to have their fight. And at that point, it becomes academic. And sooner or later, no matter what the fight is like, somebody's going to have the power of Christ compel them sooner or later. And when that happens, it's over. And what ended up coming to me through that was that possession was kind of like a mystery disease in your family. Somebody gets sick. They don't know what's wrong. You don't know what's wrong. They have these horrible symptoms, and you're scared to death. And then finally, you get it looked at by a specialist, and the specialist says, I know what your problem is, you have this. And then it is inevitable, sooner or later, you're going to see that person get better. Now it's just a matter of going through the ritual of whatever medicine is needed. And to me, that's what happens with possession, demonic possession. And 90% of these movies, they follow the same template. So I'm no longer afraid of them. I find them actually pretty entertaining. However, I said 90%, right? So let's talk about that 10%. The ones that gave me a good scare, still scare me a little bit, but were definitely good immersion therapy for me. The Entity is one of the first movies. Really scared me. It was based on a true event, but that's not why it was scary. Most of the time when I hear true event, I'm just too skeptical. But the movie, the way that it is done is very scary. It's about a woman who is an unmarried mother. She has 2 kids. She moves into this house, and she is attacked and raped by an invisible force. Now, what really was disturbing about this movie is that it hit on the things that I am afraid of. I am afraid of something invisible waiting to just attack me, right? That's the part that I can't get rid of. And this movie is all about that. And the way that this is done in this movie is kind of like how the 8-year-old me would envision it. The first attack is the mother in her bedroom. She's in front of her nightstand, combing her hair in the mirror, and all of a sudden she just kind of looks around like she hears something, you know? Like if somebody walks past you and you get that sense of a form going past you, a mass going past you, the air is a little bit different. So she looks in that direction and she gets popped. Her head goes right back. Something has struck her. When her face comes back into frame, her nose is bleeding, her lip is bleeding. She doesn't even have time to react. She has like this weird crooked smile on her face, and she is picked up and thrown into the bed by something invisible, and the bedroom door closes. The sound that's happening at that time, there's a sound effect in that movie that is so strong. It is the sound that my head, when I was terrified, used to make of the blood coursing through my brain, that this weird pumping sound. That scared me so much because I thought that that was kind of like a secret inside of my head. I couldn't believe that I was hearing it in a movie. There are several different scenes that are like this. One of the most frightening is during a birthday party. Broad daylight. They're having a birthday party for the son, one of the sons. The mother comes into the room with a birthday cake. She puts it on the table. Everybody's laughing. She goes to get plates, and she bangs into something invisible. She's just walking across the room, and she hits something, and she just looks up like she can't believe this is happening, and she gets pushed down to the ground. The idea that this thing is just there, this invisible, horrible entity is just there to cause torment, is waiting for the moment that he can just walk in front of her and ruin the entire fucking day and put everybody into terror, really, really affected me. Now, these scenes scare me, but at the same point, at the end, I'm kind of laughing at myself because, I don't really believe in this stuff. But there is a part of me, this primal piece, that doesn't let that stuff go. So what happens is I watch these movies again and again. The last movie that I want to talk about on this is Paranormal Activity. And I can hear some of you going, Paranormal Activity. I will say that Paranormal Activity is a victim of its own success. This is a movie that was a minimalist film that was brilliant. It cost nothing, and it was pure cinema. and it worked fantastically, and everybody was scared of it when they first saw it. And then what it did is it became its own template, kind of like what happened with The Exorcist. It had such an interesting, simple idea. Everybody followed that template until you had the found footage movies that just drive everybody absolutely crazy. So its initial impact has been lessened by the time and the immersion that we've had, this drenching that we've had of the found footage movement. But I will say that this movie probably comes closest to my waking nightmares about this kind of thing, because the entire movie is about being watched. The entire movie is about being stalked. The entire movie is about being prey to something that toys with you just to watch you scream. Just to watch you scream. There is no reason it's happening. And in this movie, there is no reason. It doesn't tell you. It just happens. It is deciding to mess with these people. It is deciding to destroy their lives. And this is the stuff that really scares me. The active genius of this movie is the simplest thing, which is the night camera that's set up inside of the bedroom when they're worried about paranormal activity. Do we have paranormal activity? Well, I don't know. Let's put on this camera and see all night long. And we get to see helplessly all the stuff that frightens me in my dreams. The stuff where I'm laying completely still, asleep, vulnerable, unable to defend myself. And the door opens. And the light goes on, and I don't notice. And the covers start to get slid off of me. And here, it's invisible. And here, the audience has demon vision. We're sitting here watching this, and we are helpless to do anything except watch as this thing unfolds. And as the audience was watching that movie on that midnight showing that I saw of the original Paranormal Activity, they were leaning forward, listening to everything that was going on. And their eyes were going to all four corners and the center of the frame, nonstop. They were reading the cinema. They were watching the movie, literally watching the movie. But they were watching to see where the scary thing was. And guess what? That's how I slept every night. That's how I was as a kid. And that's why I think that movie's so freaking great. Now, with all that said, fellow sufferers of demonophobia, I hope these movies are a step forward in claiming some control over this fear. Each movie that I talk about, hey, they freaked me out. It took a couple viewings before I mastered them. But the thing is, I mastered them. I watched them so many times that they have no power over me. In fact, they have become favorites of mine. I put them on when I need to feel a little bit of an energy boost, which means I own them, they don't own me. With that said, you know, we've talked about a lot of phobias today, and phobias are hard to conquer. You know, there are some additional challenges depending upon which phobia you've got. I will say that demonophobia may have certain special challenges to it, because this is a phobia that's entrenched in faith and belief. So, you know, you can prove to an arachnophobe that there are only 12 poisonous spiders in the world. You can show them over and over spiders, right? And you can put them on other people. And all of that can happen. But when you're talking about faith, when you're talking about belief, you're talking about the other world of demons, this is harder to work with because logic does not touch the ether of belief. And why I think part of this phobia is still with me is because to kind of get rid of this phobia, you need a change in belief. And for me, I did have a change of belief. I was given a set of beliefs, and those beliefs did not work for me. They did not feel true. They did not feel real. And I needed to find my own beliefs. And when I did find my own belief, a change in belief, that's some serious shit. That's a big change. With that comes doubt, a deeply seated doubt that is put in by the first belief system. The first belief system tells you that doubters are damned. So when you change, the doubt comes with you. And the thing that scares me is, what if I'm wrong? You know, when I think about demons, I'm not afraid of possession. You know, if I have possession, if I get possessed, I'm going to take it like the family mystery disease, right? Well, they'll be able to fix me. What worries me is having something that knows that I used to believe, that follows me, that wants to crush me because I have new beliefs and I have doubt. And instead of possessing me, what it wants to do is just terrify me every day in ways that I can't prove, in ways that terrify me and make me question my sanity, that I can never tell anybody else. And it's going to take its dear sweet time. It may never possess me. That's the end game. It wants to have fun because it has all eternity to deal with this fool who doubts. Yeah, that's what is the center of that fear that I still have. What if I'm wrong? Sounds like the premise of a pretty good horror movie, doesn't it? And that's the good news, right? The good news is, if you have a phobia, there is a horror film out there that addresses it. You may find that you're one of the people who can find calm when they encounter their deepest anxieties in the safety and the detachment of a horror movie, where you can hit pause, where you can get up and go to the lobby. Perhaps you can feel a sense of control over something that usually controls you if you watch a horror movie like this. If you're like me, some of the phobias are more stubborn than others. That just means you may need to watch more horror movies. And there are plenty to pick from. Like I said before, horror movies can be good for you. And that's all the things that I'm going to talk about with phobias. And what I want to do now is I'm going to go to mailbox time. This is what I talked about before. We're going to have a little bit of a change in the show. So in our mailbox today, I just want to acknowledge a few people who were kind enough to be getting in touch with me. I've had a lot of people who wanted to tell me a little bit about themselves and how they feel about the show and a little bit about their first kiss. So I want to put a shout out to John Colucci, who's given me some really fine support for the show. I also want to talk about Simon Gregory and say hello to him. He's in Kent, United Kingdom. He told me his first kiss. It's The Evil Dead 2. Now, Simon asked for a horror movie with rawness and the lo-fi realism of some of Adam Wingard's work. Now, Adam Wingard did the Blair Witch reboot, and he's also done some Glass Eye picks, and he was in VHS. He worked on VHS, and there is a low-tech kind of shaky cam look to his movies. So Simon likes those movies. He was looking for a recommendation. So I recommend Lovely Molly, directed by Eduardo Sanchez, who ironically enough was the director of the original Blair Witch, so he knows of what he talks about. It's a pretty good movie. I also want to say hi to Casey Van Hise. She recommended Shin Godzilla to me after she listened to episode 13, Picking the Scabs, which is all about allegory and how horror movies can talk about social issues. She said that Shin Godzilla is the metaphor of the nuclear anxiety of Japan as a nation, and she hoped that I would talk about that at some point. So I do want to thank Casey for bringing up that recommendation to me. Also, Tony Dixon has been very kind in his emails and support about the show. Thank you so much, Tony. Josiah Pitchforth, I give him thanks for his email discussion with me about Tobe Hooper. After Tobe Hooper died, I ended up putting out 2 shows about him, and Josiah talked quite a bit about his love for the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre and how my discussion of it made him want to go back to it. So, Josiah, I hope you really enjoyed yourself. E.J. Harden got in touch with me and told me his first kiss. His first kiss was Poltergeist, talking about Tobe Hooper, the original. So the thing that freaked him out the most was the bodies in the pool. When the bodies in the pool came up, it nearly killed him. Glad you stuck around. Glad you still enjoy horror. James Newman is an author, and he sent me his book, Odd Man Out. It's a book in the nasty vein of Jack Ketchum's Girl Next Door, and you can find that and his other books on Amazon.com. That's James Newman. Now, here's a part of the show that I want to talk about support. I've had several people contact me about financially supporting the show. And I want to say that Hellbent for Horror is a listener-funded show. I don't sell advertising. I don't like wasting your listening time with ads. Now, with that said, the show does need your help to keep going in the way that it has been. If you like the show and you think you're getting value out of the show, there are several ways that you can help out. You can tell others about the show. You can write reviews on iTunes. And you can support the show financially by several different methods. If you want to use a credit or debit card, you can contribute an amount per episode using Patreon. You can also contribute using PayPal. Now, both Patreon and PayPal will take a percentage of your payment. And I know that some people don't like to use PayPal or Patreon, so Hellbent for Horror is also listed on Zelle. Now, Zelle is a digital transfer service that is an option on most U.S. bank accounts. So you can find me on Zelle by my email address, which is Scott, 2 T's, at hellbentforhorror.com. And just list a dollar value that you feel is fair. You can also make that a recurring payment by clicking on a button when you fill out the information. And, finally, I haven't done this yet, but if you're not into the whole digital payment thing, let me know. And I'll set up a P.O. box, and you can send checks and money orders to that address. And if there is a way you wish to support that I haven't listed here, just contact me, and I'll get that service up and running for the podcast. All these payment options are on the website, hellbentforhorror.com. It's easy to support the podcast and keep it going. And end of story. Thanks for that. And I said that there was going to be one last thing, and that is going to be the pick of the episode. Yes, the new movie that I like a lot that I haven't talked about in my shows yet. And I am going to come up with a rating system on this because people love rating systems, and I've put a lot of time into this. And I think I found the right thing. There's thumbs up and there's stars and all that. I believe that when you hear what this is, and I'll tell it at the end of my review, that you will realize that this is life-changing. This is just an amazing thing. So, the movie I want to talk about is The Ritual. It could have easily been in this show for agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces. Just trade the ocean out for the dense woods of northern Sweden. And you have the same kind of terror. Instead of a horizon, you just have everything looks the same, tree after tree after tree. And then you get up over a horizon or you get over a hill and boing, there's more trees as far as the eye can see. That's the kind of terror that this movie really understands, that when the woods are quiet is when the woods are scary. There's a reason everything has gone quiet. Why is it that the trees suddenly sound like they have sucked in all of the noises that are around? Why is every living thing hiding, is basically the kind of feeling that it is. And this movie, I will say, I think it's really good. It doesn't have a lot of new ideas in it. In other words, it's not like this revolutionary concept. It's 4 friends hike into these northern Swedish woods to honor a dead friend, and when they get out there, they get lost, and then things get really creepy. So it's not something that's earth-shattering. It's how the story is told. And what I will tell you is that this is an expertly told story of slow burn dread that turns into full-blown out horror. And it is a movie that does something that is extremely rare in films for people to do, because it's hard to do. It's fear right on the edge of liminal space. And what I mean by that is the camera will pan to just barely see something moving out of frame. There are actions where something is advancing and the camera cuts before it gets there. You're left with this constant feeling that you just missed something. Or you will see something that is in the frame that is so camouflaged that it doesn't even register that it's there till it moves. That's liminal space. And this movie does this with such expertise that I really was applauding it by the end. With that, really strong acting, fantastic photography, the action is really cool, and if you watch to the very end, you're going to see something that you've not seen before. There's something really unique and really special at the end of The Ritual that I think is really good. It is a movie that was out in Britain 2017. It is now out on Netflix. You can free stream it on Netflix in 2018. And this movie was so good, I give it 4 giant eyeballs rolling down a mountain. That's right, folks. 4 giant eyeballs rolling down a mountain. I hope you've enjoyed the show. And until the next time that we talk, stay hellbent.
And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and in the wings is a Hellbent for Horror book entitled Screaming for Pleasure. I'm currently writing it, and we're shooting for a release in the fall of 2018, so spread the word and keep your eye out. More info on that later. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.